that you all do such a fine job of listening to your citizens, and I think it's the type of good representative government that all people look for. And so I really wanted to say thank you for your willingness to listen and let people speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Next speaker's card I have is Billy Scruggs. Billy, welcome.
Mayor Hallman, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here today in support of the application before you at this time. This past week, I had the opportunity to read the comments Mayor Hallman made for you in the State of the City address, probably like Mr. Pond's lawyer. I would like to point out a few that are most appropriate to this proposal, starting with the opening statement. The theme of my remarks this year, and a theme that I believe permeates our goals, initiatives, and outcomes, is resiliency, the flexibility and adaptability of a community to meet challenges and change. Then under formidable challenges, we're helping, already mentioned is the rental housing stock. I'm not going to repeat that. But to go on, where a helping hand is needed, the city will continue to assist redevelopment and repurposing of underused properties, as seen most successfully in the case of the old Lord Pageant Motel, which will become the Copper Fox Distillery, but more needs to be done. Final quote, we continue to make homeless prevention a high priority for the city as we help residents become more self-sufficient, moving from transitional to permanent housing. Excellent State of the City report. I was very pleased to see it. As a city and hotel owner, I am concerned with regard to the aging lodging properties in Williamsburg. I have been and continue to be involved in discussions about the decline and future development possibilities of these properties. Perhaps we will have more brewers and distillers come forward for this adaptive reuse. Until that time, isn't it still up to the property owner to determine what they think is the highest and best use for the property they pay city taxes on? Although many might prefer a drugstore, restaurant, 7-Eleven, or bank on every corner, it's a fairly safe bet that in the life cycle and appropriate viability of this particular plot, the owner probably has a pretty good handle on what use can best meet his family's financial obligations. The staff statistic with regard to the remaining availability of commercial space and how this proposal may detract from it may be misleading by the fact that much of the commercial stock in Williamsburg is vacant at this time, just as this whole commercial lot could become if this use is not allowed to move forward. Also, although the SUP could be granted for housing at this time, I do see this as a transitional use. This property is still in the commercial corridor, and if a higher and better commercial use is offered to the property owner, he can always seek approval to redevelop. As you well know, the tourism industry is the primary reason the citizens of Williamsburg pay such a low property tax rate and enjoy the economic vitality thus afforded. This proposal is suited perfectly for the opportunity for convenient workforce housing for many residents and workers that are on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale in the city that are the backbone of this industry. There are simply few affordable places for these members of our community to live locally. As a restaurant and hotel owner, I employ many of these hard workers and have first-hand knowledge of their lack of opportunity for safe, convenient, affordable places to live. With public transportation not meeting their needs, this is the perfect location for them to walk or ride a bike to work. These are the hourly workers who in many cases earn less than $12 an hour. I have heard some people from the city say the city already does more than its share of offering housing for those people. Let James City County house them. When I say those people, I refer to what I believe might be the 600-pound elephant in the room. You know those people. The perception is they're the ones with the domestic issues, drug and alcohol abuse issues. They create blight. And oh yes, they have children. As stated in the city message, these social and economic challenges tend to pull city tax revenues downward. At the same time, they push the need and demand for public spending upward. I would say, if this enters into your mind, those people, with regard to who might live here, please be careful not to stereotype. Many of those people already live there for 90-day stretches. Won't you offer some of these in this community the same commitment of housing that you offered to the people that moved in the 9 previous developments that you approved under this SUP application process? I would assume part of your concern is that the floodgates will be open to all aged hotels that would seek this conversion. I would be. I have a simple answer to that. Put an immediate moratorium on applications beyond this and any others that are currently in the pipeline. It certainly would not be reasonable, fair, or right to this applicant to deny his request because of what others might do in the future. If not approved, it is possible that little opportunity that now exists for this housing will be gone very soon. Much like squeezing a balloon, if we put all those people out, they will go elsewhere. But of course, maybe no longer will they be our responsibility. During a moratorium, you would have the opportunity, as suggested by staff in their recommendations, to review whether this section of zoning code needs to be revised. Finally, I'm not here only because I consider Doug a friend that I think a lot of, but also because I think it is of tremendous importance for the city to do anything within its reason to help current and long-time business survive. I am aware the city offers many types of incentives in the way of subsidies to attract new business in the areas of the city. Shouldn't we do the best we can to keep those that have been working hard and have been here a long time? Here you have a long-time resident and resilient businessman seeking an opportunity to repurpose his property. He is a great example of a business owner that is flexible and adaptable. All he is seeking in the way of assistance is for you to approve the fact that he has met the guidelines for his proposal that are established in city code. I trust you will grant him that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. The final card I have is Greg Granger.
Members of council, thank you very much. Quality of life. That is why many people choose to live in Williamsburg, because we have an exceptional quality of life. We should all have an exceptional quality of life. There are a lot of people who would love to live in Williamsburg and enjoy the amenities that Williamsburg offers, who have a hard time living here. They're able to work here, but they're not able to live here. There is a need for housing in the price range that this proposal would offer. The apartments along Mount Vernon Avenue, the old Heritage Inn, they provided an opportunity for people to live and work in this community who otherwise might not be able to. The college is great. They've expanded. Many of the apartments along Mount Vernon Avenue are now college student occupied. That's competition. Competition is good. People looking to live in Williamsburg in an apartment that's $900 or $800, there are not many choices there. There's not a lot of competition there. But if we have that competition, if we have something like this coming in, then that will increase the quality of those apartments, perhaps the quantity as well. This is a unique opportunity to make the numbers work, because the land and the basic structure is there. Where else could one put 40 apartments in this proximity to the places where the residents would work and still be able to rent at a price anywhere close to $800 or $900 a month? Starting from a blank slate and building such a project and acquiring the land, the numbers are really challenging to make that happen. There is a need, and there is no place as well qualified and uniquely qualified as the applicant's property. If you want to improve the quality of life for all residents of Williamsburg, not just the ones who live in the traditional neighborhoods, you should support this project, just as so many residents do and the Planning Commission has. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Anybody else wish to speak to this issue? Mickey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Hallman and members of the City Council, thanks for the opportunity to allow me to address you today. Interestingly enough, each one of you up at the dais, remember that I've called you independently. We've had some dialogue, and ironically enough, that dialogue was not to be in favor of the project. And very candidly, and as I spoke to you, I had told you, each and every one of you, I had not spoken to the applicant about the project as well. So after some thought, it came to me that maybe I'd be doing myself a disservice not to really vent this out properly, because I was only going with the information that I had available to me at the time. Much like the Ebola scare, sometimes the more you know, the worse it can be. But I can tell you, after having some time spent talking to the applicant about the project, Doug, as we all know, it's come to light some different things, and also I took the opportunity to additionally talk to some of my staff members. I have the profound luxury that I have a business that's in that corridor, and I'll affectionately refer to this as the Northeast Triangle, a place that I've spent some time doing some studies with. Whereas I don't think that the greatest concern, which ironically enough is maybe a zoning issue, is the unintended consequences of granting the exception to this particular application. What do we do from here? There's apparently some work that needs to be done on that end of the pendulum. However, I would agree with what Billy said earlier. Now, after having more time to look at the plats, look at the information, and see what now the project looks like, it does fall more in harmony with what is in the quadrant, and it does coexist with the other products that are there as well. Workforce housing is something that I think that we all are concerned with, and having the appropriate use. You know, and I'm reminded that not always does it have to be a new product from ground up, such as the shops at 2nd Street, which would later on have a compartment of a housing component to it. But this is at current a great repurposing and reuse of this property. In fact, having redeveloped our product on 2nd Street as well, I know sometimes it's a leap of faith as a businessman to try to make these courageous steps to put your foot forward and to be something that you're not. But as it's proven in our situation, that was truly the right step for us. After speaking to Doug, I was excited about revitalizing this project, because I can think of also what happens if we don't do this. It's the vision of the applicant, and I tend to lean towards the property owner's use and the rights, and I think taking in consideration he's met the criteria for special use permit and following the ordinance, it's really truly up to council that they grant this special use permit. I would probably, now knowing more of the intricacies of the project and what it would mean to the city redevelopment wise, it might be the first step of many, and certainly the first step of a multitude of conversations on how we address this moving forward. But I would ask that you not defer this decision today, and that I would again support the project. And being a stakeholder immediate and adjacent to this area, I could see it being a benefit to the community as well. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mickey. Anybody else wish to speak? Susan, welcome.
I could have brought a little notebook like Ron Kirkland. I didn't.
You couldn't see it.
Then I couldn't see it. There's this eye thing, So my name is Susan Branch Smith, and I live at 608 College Terrace here in the city of Williamsburg. And I wanted to say I appreciate all of the information that I've heard here today about how the reuse plan would, or special use permit would help certain populations in the city. But I especially want to point out that if this is one of 20 or more properties in the city that need help, I think it behooves the city to help people in this position and in similar positions, as opposed to just possibly denying or rejecting a proposal. That that you're there, showing him that, or anybody in town, that you're a willing participant in helping him stay afloat in his business, because that's what it's about. He's not trying to bring business in, he's trying to stay alive here in Williamsburg, which is true for a lot of people. So anyway, I would encourage you to listen to the plan and approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Anybody else wish to speak? If not, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for discussion and action. Before turning to my colleagues, I'd like to make a brief statement as well. In the recently adopted goals, initiatives, and outcome for the 2015-16 biennium, City Council indicated that it wishes to develop and implement a new self-sufficiency model in 2015 to provide transitional and permanent housing for city residents. Further, in the State of the City address, I suggested homelessness is a national, regional, and local issue that requires solutions transcending political boundaries. Working with neighboring jurisdictions and with non-governmental and faith-based organizations, we continue to make homeless prevention a high priority for the city as we help residents become more self-sufficient, moving from transitional to permanent housing. But we can and must do more. It is incumbent upon the city to provide innovative ideas and solutions for regional consideration. The need for workforce and transitional housing in our community is clear and of long standing. The applicant's proposal has at its core an idea that highlights this issue. However, in finding a solution to the problem, that solution needs to be one that is best for the individuals and families needing housing, best for the property owner or owners involved, best for all the citizens of Williamsburg, and one that creates a precedent that this community can embrace. In addition, the solution should be one that provides us with the best regional approach, one that provides a model that could be adopted by other localities in the historic triangle and beyond. Finally, the solution needs to be one that provides the optimal location within the city. That said, let me turn to my fellow council members for their comments and discussion. Paul?
Gosh, I don't have anything so eloquently prepared. This reminds me of a conversation I had several years ago with Mr. Tuttle. I don't know if you remember, sir. We were heading down to one of the regional meetings. I think nobody else was available, so I was last on the list. We were driving down there together and talking about the issue of what do we do to help property owners of aging hotel stock who aren't able to make the numbers they need to make given the levels of visitation, occupancy in the current environment and maybe for the foreseeable future, and yet who aren't in an economic position where they can themselves redevelop their property, whether it's because of debt on the property or the inability to get financing for whatever their dream might be. And we talked about that for a while and weren't able to come up with much of an answer there. And the more I think back on that, I'm just reminded that it's something we need to pay more attention to, particularly I think through the EDA and conversations that group has, to look at ways to provide whatever opportunities are available. So here's an owner of an aging property who's come up with a solution that he feels will, my understanding of the application is not transform the property to a permanent new use, but to be something of a transition for the property, something that helps the property continue to operate successfully, economically viably, until other economic forces in the community come together to change the dynamics of that particular corridor, which then could open up a variety of other options, which I'd be just guessing at what they might be at this point. And so that is good. The concern that I've had with this proposal is the conversion of commercial space to residential space. Now, some might argue, well, but we have the opportunity in the B2 for the mixed-use developments to be developed on site. If it's a vacant piece of land, why not be able to convert an existing piece of property? So it is a fair question, especially when I understand that, at least I don't want to project, but from what I've heard from the applicant, the idea would be as soon as this, the financial situation turned around, to reconvert this to a completely commercial venture, or, if that makes sense, or redevelop in a newer mixed-use product, whatever the market would bear. And my understanding is that's probably what the city would prefer, that if this were to happen, that it only be for a limited period of time, and I think one or two of the residents have mentioned that, and that hopefully things will turn around and the property will be able to be recreated or reimagined in some way. And I think that's good. But where I get stuck on this, and this isn't the applicant's fault, I think this falls more on the jurisdiction, is what happens then to the people who need, as many people have eloquently conveyed, there are plenty of workforce people in this community who need a place to live. So we put in a group of inventory, or an allotment of inventory, for a limited period of time. Where do those people go when it goes away? Is that, I don't know that that's the property owner's responsibility. I don't know that it's the city's responsibility. But I think it's unfortunate not to have some kind of plan or exit strategy predetermined so that these folks just aren't, as I think Mr. Scruggs was talking about, just cast about and then have to move somewhere else. One of the folks who wrote to us mentioned how this isn't, and Mayor, I think this is what you were getting at, this isn't an isolated Williamsburg issue with the need for this type of housing. And I don't want to too much conflate the need for the housing and the proposal, because we don't know sitting here exactly who would be the tenants. I mean, we can make all sorts of assumptions, and some of them might be fairly accurate, but we don't know that. But if this is an issue that is a regional issue, it doesn't stop at the borders of the city of Williamsburg. It doesn't begin there. How do we get our neighboring jurisdictions, who also have hospitality product in their communities, some very significant product, how do we get them to work with us to approach this with a regional solution and not piecemeal? As Mr. Scruggs had mentioned about what some folks had said to him, the city does lead the way in multifamily housing. We currently have 36% of our housing inventory is multifamily. That compares with 17% of the entire housing inventory in James City County and 17% in all of York County. I don't know the numbers for Upper York County. I'm guessing here, but I'm assuming it's less. What are we doing to bring our neighboring jurisdictions in to create this regional solution? I think the value of this conversation, obviously it's of huge value to the applicant, but to the community, to me, the greater value of this conversation is we need to get some of these questions on the table and discussed in the right forums, seriously, and with an intention to have a tangible outcome. Over the past several years, I've raised the issue of inclusionary zoning. It, for whatever reason, hasn't gone anywhere. I think that's something else we need to look at and reconsider. And all this coming out of this conversation. I think some of the concerns that I have, I think they could be figured out. I'm not sure they're figured out right here. But that doesn't mean that I don't know, I'm still thinking. That's all I have to say right now.
Okay. Scott?
All right. First, I'd like to say how much I appreciate the amount of contact I've gotten over the past, really a month since Planning Commission. Those folks have lamented the lack of workforce housing, lack of transitional housing, as well as bringing forward issues related to service sector employees. This type of housing has a long history in Williamsburg, but it really took this project to put it squarely in the public's eye. It's something that's been long overdue. Universally, everyone I've heard from is committed to finding a solution to these issues. I think it's a testament to the quality of our residents. The SUP before us today provides really the first opportunity since I've been on council to directly address this need. That being said, this project as it stands today has quite a few merits. It would help meet the demand that everyone has outlined. It has many nearby community amenities, which were pointed out earlier, particularly adjacent to recreation facilities and open space. Furthermore, it provides an opportunity for an adaptive reuse of an aging property, which is something that we've long encouraged. What this proposal says to me is this is something that can work. The community supports and the demand is obvious. But at the same time, we need to ensure that it's done in the best way possible and meets the needs of the community in a way that doesn't inhibit how we address these issues in the future. That being said, and as Paul pointed out, I don't believe we have had the adequate discussion as a city or a broader community on a strategy about how to best address these issues. It's really only because of this project that the discussion now is ongoing at the level that it is. Staff is concerned about how this model could be replicated on other properties across town. I think that's important to address. I think we need to have a discussion also about the loss of commercially zoned land. Paul makes a good point about, yes, this is a transitional use, but once other elements change, where do we go from there? Also, we need to be comfortable this type of project is in keeping with the overall best practices, best public policy for meeting these workforce and transitional housing needs. So to this point, we haven't had that discussion. Much of that onus is on us. So it's what I think we ought to be talking about today.
Thanks. Judy?
Thank you. I have 3 problems with this application. Some of them have been referred to by my fellow members of council. The first is that this is a commercial property, and we have very limited amount of commercial property in the city, and I think it's a mistake when we start losing it to other uses. The applicant does say, as has been pointed out, that it's not a long-term strategy, it's a 5 to 10-year strategy, but we have absolutely no guarantee of that. And so we may be losing commercial property. The second is this whole issue of housing. People keep bandying words about the housing. Transitional housing and workforce housing are not the same thing by any stretch of the imagination. The city has not done a bad job with workforce housing. We've got Strawberry Plains, we have the HUD projects that we have. The city has, in fact, been a leader in that kind of housing in this area. We need to do more. Clearly, we need to do more, but that's workforce housing. Transitional housing, we've done almost nothing, and the area has done almost nothing, and we need to do more. As has been pointed out by my colleagues, we need to do more in transitional housing. However, I don't think this is something that ought to be done on a spot zoning, case-by-case basis. We need to have a comprehensive plan, and then we need to look at what we need. And we need to work with not only the other 2 jurisdictions. We need to work with United Way. We need to work with Salvation Army. We need to work with social services. The people who need transitional housing need medical care. They need mental health care. They need food. They need clothing. They don't just need a place to live. They need the whole plethora of services that are offered by social services. They need coordination. And just providing the housing isn't going to solve the problem of the people who need transitional living. And finally, I do fear the precedent. If we do this, I think setting a precedent is what will happen. And the suggestion that we pass this and then put a moratorium on strikes me as not the way to go. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Judy. Let me just say that Doug, as the applicant, I want to applaud you for coming forward with what I think is a innovative way of thinking about this issue. I think, as you've heard from me, in individual conversations, I think you've heard from council, that there are a lot of questions that still remain. Deb Snyder, I think, was very eloquent in putting some of those forward as well. And from City Council's perspective, we need to think about what is the best public policy to move forward with. And so I think I think we're almost there, but personally I don't think we're quite there yet. So any further comments?
So would you like I want to continue to talk about this.
Yes.
I'd also like to give staff some direction about how to talk about this.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly what we need.
So, would you prefer a motion? Or
Can I ask the city
Yeah.
attorney a couple
Yeah,
of questions,
right, yeah.
do you mind? I know you enjoy this so much. Talk to us about what we can and cannot do. And I take Ms. Newsom's point. I wouldn't want to establish a moratorium on this either. I don't think that speaks well of process. But are there ways to set a threshold citywide that this type of transitional use, or by transitional, I'm not talking about who's living there. I'm talking about the transition of the commercial property, motel rooms in particular, to fully residential property. Is there a way to set a citywide threshold on how much we could tolerate at any one time? Or is there some way to control the number besides just individually deciding on special use permits?
Only through your zoning ordinance and the land use that you permit, either through rezoning, special use permit, special exception, understanding what you have and being able to react to that through your ordinances.
But if we reached a certain point where, I'm just trying to understand, I'm not saying this is what we should do. We hit a certain point, let's say, I know some of the speakers said no other motel would do this, some have suggested very few. Let's say 2 or 3 other motels did a portion of their inventory, and we collectively decided, that's about as much as we can handle in this community for whatever the reason. Can we, at that point, we could then adjust the zoning to limit that?
You can amend the zoning ordinance at any time that council desires to do that, as long as you follow the process. And of course, you have a comprehensive plan that you would also have to look at in that process.
Right. I think that's all the questions I have for you.
Well, I think we, I get a sense that there's a lot that we all like about this project, but there are also lots of other questions that aren't addressed here. So we need to figure out a way to move forward, and maybe the way to move forward is to postpone consideration of this and then ask staff to come back to us with more information and more ideas. One question I have, for example, is as I look at this proposal, it seems to me that many of the things that are talked about in this proposal look very much like a long-stay motel. Why isn't that an option to be considered versus changing to apartments? So that there are just a lot of, and I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know the pros and cons of that either. But it seems to me having time to work through those might be useful for us.
I think if we're going to, whatever the right term is, defer this, and we're going to have staff answer questions, we need to have a very specific list of questions,
Right.
so that they know what they're doing, and they can come back and we can say, oh, okay, this will all work, or
Right.
this one doesn't work.
Do you want that to come out of today's meeting, or can that happen
Why?
independently?
Well, I think we could direct council.
I can share the questions I have.
Yeah, to proceed with something, and that we could, and ask the public to provide different questions into it.
But at the same time, I'm also sympathetic to anybody going through this process, that it takes a while to create all the material, to submit the application, to go to the planning commission, have the advertising, public hearing, and to come to city council. I wouldn't want this dragged out for months.
I think we can direct
Wrap it up
council in a timely manner.
And deal with it again in January?
I'm not, for me, I think there are too many questions to ask over the holiday season for them to come back in January now. Maybe February or March, I don't know. But one thing we need to see is what are all the kinds of issues that have been raised. I mean, take Deb Snyder's remarks. I mean, there were a whole series of issues there that I think need to be addressed as we search for a solution that provides good public policy for the city. So I think we could ask City Council to come back in a timely manner. Staff to come back in a timely manner.
I would ask staff how long they think it would take, but I still don't know what all the questions are.
Right. So I mean, I think we have to depend upon sort of the sense I have out of this discussion is that everybody we've heard from and City Council thinks that this kind of housing is very important, and that we need to come up with a model or a solution that not only works for the city, but also provides options for other localities in the region, because this is not just a Williamsburg issue. This is a regional issue. So I think we could expect them to come back in a timely manner, and where timely is not a year, to come back to us with something, or 6 months or whatever. But I think making it more specific than that is problematic unless you have all the questions in front of you.
I have another question for the city attorney. The application is what it is. I mean, that's what's before us. We can approve it with certain conditions?
You can attach conditions to it so long as they meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. They need to be reasonably related to the property and the uses proposed.
So, and I'm just using this as an example, I'm not saying this. Ms. Snyder mentioned about the number of people living in a particular size unit. Is that something that's a type of condition that could be?
Yes.
Okay. I'm happy to, I mean, I do think we need some more conversation, but I worry that I don't want to draw it out too long.
No, I don't think any of us do, but I think, I think with that discussion and with staff's input, we could you could move forward in a number of directions. One, you would still have this proposal, and you could use those as conditions attached to this proposal, or you could say, here's another way to go, see if the applicant is interested in being
Then we have to
involved
go
in
back
that.
through the public hearing process.
Probably, yes. But, until we know sort of what those conditions might be and what the options might be, I think it's difficult to move forward putting particular conditions on this right now.
Putting even the conditions that Ms. Snyder mentioned, the ones you mentioned, really don't answer my questions.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying. So we need to put out on the table, what are the things that we need
That's right.
addressed,
Yeah.
so that everybody can
And
respond.
it seems to me the way to do that is to ask staff to come back to us in a timely fashion with proposals and options to think about here.
Would it make you feel, I mean, I understand, probably a week and a half of the next month is going to be, consumed in holidays. So January is probably out. If we ask them to come back in February, I feel like that's a reasonable time.
I think we could do that. And these things are always malleable, so,
Sure.
that if we get into it and find out that there are really lots of other options and other issues, then we can extend it. But I don't have a problem putting a February date.
Yeah, I'd like to set that as an
Yeah.
expectation.
Yes, that's fine.
Agreed. All right. Would you like a motion?
I would like a motion.
I move that we postpone consideration of this SUP request until such time, until February of 2015.
Well, I think we postpone consideration of this until such time as we have, something concrete to say about it.
I like the motion as it stands, because then if there's not something ready, we talk about it, we say why it's not ready, and then we say what the next.
We don't
step
keep
is.
the applicant hanging out there.
Right.
That's fine with me.
All right. I'll restate. Move to postpone consideration of this SUP request until February 2015. And in addition, direct the city manager and staff to report back in that same time with policy concepts and zoning options for residential use in commercial areas. Residential use commercial areas need to address workforce and transitional housing. using some of our city's existing motel units. Is that acceptable?
Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons. Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Call.
Aye.
Great. Thank you all very much for this. This has been a very good process, and we'll be back in February. with
Can I
this.
just, in addition to this, at some point, and I don't know if this is something we could do in the retreat, but how do we keep these other aspects of the conversation to go way beyond this application?
Oh, yeah.
Going forward?
Oh,
Because let's not
I think
lose,
it's all part and parcel of the
let's not lose the interest and the momentum at this, momentum, this
Yep.
interest.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Terrific. Okay, our next agenda item are reports. The first, monthly financial statements. Jack, anything in particular to point out?
Just looking at the statement for the month ending the end of November, we were actually about $1 million ahead of where we were last year, if you consider the fact that our revenues are running about $500,000 ahead right now from what was actually brought in at the same point last year. On the expenditure side, simply because of deferral, we haven't spent at the same rate on schools, although we certainly will. But we're just behind, so that's why it's looking as strong as it does right now. But more realistically, we're really pretty much right on target with our budget.
Any questions on financial reports? Not monthly department operating reports, anything in particular?
I had nothing in particular to point out. If you have any questions, I'd be
Any
happy to
questions?
address them.
City manager reports, we have one, and this is the executive search services for the city manager.
Yes, sir. I have forwarded to you a letter received last week from Springstead Incorporated proposing executive search services for the city council. And the proposal is outlined. It's a fairly extensive letter running over 6 or 7 pages, and they're suggesting a timeline on page 4, on page 5, that would have project initiation and position analysis in January, then in the latter part of January, running into into February, recruiting and preliminary screening of candidates, then identification of semifinalists in the latter part of February, beginning of March, then throughout March, selection of finalists and candidate presentations to the city council, and finally interviewing, decision-making, employment negotiation in April, and then realizing that period could extend beyond that, but would be the target time. So I'm not making any particular recommendation to you. I'm rather forwarding on the letter from Springstead. You've had an initial meeting with Mr. Anzavino, and so with that, I turn it to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a quite comprehensive approach. This is a top-notch firm that has a lot of experience and knowledge in both of Virginia and across the country. So I think, and again, I think we would work with them, and particularly working with them to get as much public input up front in terms of some of the characteristics we're looking for in this process. Any questions, comments?
I have a question for the city manager.
Yep.
What's your thought on the timeline that Mr. Anzavino or Springstead have suggested? Do you feel that's reasonable?
Reasonable, but
Ambitious.
based on experience, normally it runs a little longer than
Yeah.
that. It just,
I just want to say-
coordinating meetings mainly and just taking, it assumes each step moves
It's an
along.
aggressive.
It's an aggressive.
It's like a
schedule.
construction project. There's always something unanticipated that
Right.
comes up. I just want to set the public's expectation. This doesn't mean in May we're going to have a new candidate in place and ready to go.
Could, but
Unlikely.
Certainly not in place.
Right. Maybe we'll find one next month. One thing I would say is, Mr. Anzavino, I have confidence in his ability. I think the proposal's good, and I think the price is, I found fairly reasonable. So,
The other searches I've been involved in for regional things, this is a very nice price.
Yeah, this is considerably less than the chamber.
Yeah.
But also, I will point out that the chamber, Karen Rorden's position was filled in a timetable very much like this, but it was a whole lot of meeting. And it worked well, but it was very labor intensive on the panel's part.
Yeah, I think we're all
We're up for that.
We're all aware of that and need to keep that in mind as we move forward. Doug?
No, I'm comfortable with Springstead and the timeline that they've put out there.
I'm fine. Okay. Jack, what do you need?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Need a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we authorize you, on behalf of City Council, to engage Springstead Incorporated for city manager search services as described in a letter of engagement dated December 3, 2014.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Jerry?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Fonda.
Next agenda item is city attorney reports. Chris, you're up again.
Back in the summer when I talked to you about the legislation that was adopted this year, we talked about the constitutional amendment that was on the ballot for an exemption for the spouse of military members who were killed in action. That passed in November, and so now we are required by law to include that exemption in the city code. So what you have before you is an ordinance to provide that exemption in the city code for the primary residence of a spouse of a military member who has been killed in action. The exemption would take effect on January 1st, so for the second half of fiscal year 2015. That would be the first calendar period for which this would be effective. The spouse has to occupy the dwelling as his or her primary residence. The exemption is for the spouse's proportional share of the property. So if the spouse owns a 50% interest in the property along with a third party who isn't related, then they would get the 50% of the tax exemption. The tax exemption is up to the amount of the average cost of a dwelling, assessment of a dwelling in a single-family zoning district in the city. And if your dwelling exceeds that amount, then you don't get the exemption. And I understand from our tax assessor that's $250,000. So it would be $250,000 for the dwelling plus the value of the land would be the exemption. We don't really have a choice with this. The language of the ordinance is from the state code. And so we have proposed this as adopted, and the staff recommendation is that council adopt the ordinance.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions?
Just, I think, or comment, I'm not sure. Gosh, I mean, you think about somebody who's paid that kind of sacrifice for us, and you want to do what you can to help them. And I get the state wanting to do this, and, you know, the people have voted on it, and so we're going to do it. I don't get the cap. What's the logic there? Like, somehow if your house is worth more, your sacrifice was less.
I think they're trying to make this somewhat less painful than it would be if someone owns an exceptionally expensive piece of property, but I'm not sure that's where the cap necessarily needs to be. But that's what
And there's
the law
no
says.
flexibility there.
There is no flexibility. This is mandatory, and the provisions are not ones that we can pick and choose our options.
And I'd like to point out, this is one more state where the case where the state decided something and we get to pay for it.
Well, sure, and it would have been nice if, maybe they did this. Did they accompany this with an exemption from income tax?
This is a state, no.
That's what they collect.
Yeah, yeah.
This is just the real property
I mean, I
tax.
think,
As
how many
opposed to
houses-
what we
how many houses can you, I know there are houses in the city that are less than $250,000, but there aren't a lot of them.
As
Well,
we
that-
just were
that
having a
is the
discussion
average.
about.
Could we have adopted this ordinance on our own?
There's no authorization for this ordinance, so this is the Dillon rule requirement.
Right, yeah. Gotcha. We do it or we don't do it. That's
Well,
that's-
you
we
now
do it.
don't have
We're doing
choice.
it.
You
Yeah,
have
we're
to
doing
do
it.
this.
Yes.
To that end,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I move the City Council adopt the proposed ordinance number 14-29.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please, Jerry.
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
So unfinished business, new business, we have 2 appointments.
I'm still, this exemption, just,
Sorry, I took that.
that's all right. That irritates me. I'm sorry. I wish Senator Miller and Delegate Mason were still here to talk to us about this. Mr. Mayor, I move that effective January 1st, 2015, City Council appoint Kira Cook to the Williamsburg James City County School Board for a 4-year term to expire December 31, 2018, and that City Council reappoint Robert Lane and Brian Smith to the Architectural Review Board for 4-year terms to expire December 31, 2018, Ed Richardson to the Board of Building Code Appeals for a 5-year term to expire December 31, 2019, Fred Siegel to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a 5-year term to expire December 31, 2019, and Dan Quarles and Justin Schaller to the Planning Commission for 4-year terms to expire December 31, 2018.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please? Jerry?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mrs. Swansky.
Aye.
Our final agenda item today is open forum. I have 3 speakers' cards. The first of those is David Crambuel.
David Cranville, as you know, I live at 201 Harrison Avenue. Members of the City Council, I think we're in a very important, a very exciting period here. I call it a transition period. It gives us a chance to, as we move ahead with what you just approved, to think through what we're doing very well, and there are many, many things we're doing very well. The discussion you just had on like how you divide the baby, I mean, it's tough, and you're doing very well. But I think it's really important that we do our best to involve the best that we have in our community in how we move forward in terms of what we're going to look like in July and the years going forward. We have exceptional talent on our committees, on the EDA, on the Planning Commission, even on the now being restructured and stronger subcommittee of the Planning Commission, the Beautification Committee, on zoning, and on all of these committees. And some of these people have exceptional talents with respect to selection of the kind of leadership we're looking for. So I'm strongly urging you to, as individuals or somehow, to really get these people involved and get their opinions as to what would make us even stronger. And in that regard, I'd like us, each of you, to think through in the last years or so, whatever, the things that, of course, we've done well, and that's the vast majority, and then those things that we know we could have done better, where probably we made some mistakes, probably we allocated, maybe, in my mind, an issue, too much pressure and responsibility and not enough involvement. So our city manager is sort of the lightning rod and has to really deal with everything that could happen, bad or negative, and how perhaps city council as a whole communicates within itself, even though there's different views, and how it communicates with the leader that we're selecting, the sort of the general for all of us, and even how the mayor and the vice mayor. I just think there's room for improvement. I don't know anybody would disagree with that, and just think through how we can make an even more effective team. So that's my thought. And I'll only, and a totally separate issue, so I don't want to diminish what I just said, but I want you to realize that some of us, like myself, see that there are things that we could do, and it's complicated in getting them done. And this point is to be made in December. I would have made it another month, but it has no meaning in February or whatever. If you think about what we really need, which came out of your address a month ago, we really need to increase revenue. A very difficult problem. But I mean, it's one thing to do the excellent job that our city manager does in controlling expenses, but we really need to increase revenue. So think about where can we increase revenue. I don't think it's going to come from property values. It's really going to come from people spending money in the city. Okay, so then, I mean, this has been something I'm very keen on, and I use beautification as one aspect of it. But think about this. We're spending millions on groups for global people coming here, and that's great. and you've done an excellent job of making that even more effective. But then there comes the question, they're here, and then there are all of us in James City County, York County, all the way down to Newport News, the edges of Richmond. And so then these people come here, and now we're competing with everybody else, Newtown and whatever. So we need to think about, ourselves as well. How does Williamsburg look? And I don't mean this as a criticism, I mean it as a hope for the future, but honestly, if you look at what's on Prince George Street on one block, and you look at what's on the Duke of Gloucester, and you walk 20 more feet, there's not a single Christmas decoration except what's on individual commercial places. So if you're Holly Shields' place up the street, or you're the Triangle Block, which we're trying to have alive, or if you're on 2nd Street, wouldn't we want to have something on our lampposts or whatever as an example of, the question is it worth it? But my point is we ought to be thinking about it, we ought to be investing in it, and we put up these things on Richmond Road and so forth, and I'm saying that's a starting point. But in addition to what I said at the beginning here, we really need to think about our revenue stream, and this is just one tiny example of the kind of thoughts that I hope we'll be dealing with going forward. But thank you for the wonderful job you're doing, and it's a very difficult day today dealing with that question.
Thank you, David. Next speaker's card I have is John Whitley.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I'm John Whitley. I live at 110 Governor Berkeley Road. I'm here to speak on behalf of the residents of Governor Berkeley Road and in reference to the speed humps for which an engineering study has been completed and for which sightings of 2 speed humps have been so designated. I want to commend Mr. Clayton, Dan Clayton, for his attention and due diligence to this. As we know, the speed humps came forward because of the concern of the neighbors, young families with children, about the safety on that street, even to the point of they're hoping that something such as this, that these humps can help to control to some degree the traffic, speeding, and other behaviors through there. A couple of the families, as I've said to you before, have concerns enough that if the city cannot help to abate these issues, then perhaps they need to move somewhere else. And that really bothers me because Skipwith Farm is becoming new again, and I mean that by age, and we need to do what we can. You have placed Watch for Children signs. You have done the augmented fine sign, and I commend you for that. I don't want you to be concerned that if you do something on Governor Berkeley, what will the other streets want? Don't let that in any way be a criterion to address the concerns of the residents, and they're wanting their street, our street, to be safe. You have received a letter from Carl Slate, who is the president of Skipwith Farms Neighborhood Association, in which, in a very positive way, he has spoken supportively of the residents of Governor Berkeley Road, bringing forward issues and suggestions through petition and support of city staff and you. That can help abate these issues. I appreciate Carl doing that. Carl was a bit taken back because, I don't know if I used the word, the Skipwith Farm Neighborhood Association has washed its hand. I did say that they were much of a paper tiger in reference to this because there had been pushback, and that's the statement. There's nothing we can do about that. But I commend Carl. I thank him dearly for his statement to you and explain to you the organizational structure of Skipwith Farms Neighborhood Association. Not that you needed it, and that they are supportive of what the residents are proposing. Again, I thank you. Thank you for your leadership. I wish you the joyous of holidays and a Happy New Year.
Terrific. Thank you, John. Final speaker's card I have is Gary Shelley. Gary, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Gary Shelley. I live at 205 Indian Springs Road. At both the May and the June City Council meetings this year, I asked your fellow council members to select someone other than you to be our next mayor, and I reminded them that your actions reflect not only upon you, but upon them and the city as well. Since that time, 3 citizens have respectfully approached you in open forum regarding illegal intrusions onto their property by city personnel. Ms. Carrie Flanagan told you about multiple events that occurred on her property during her time here in Williamsburg. Mr. Philip Christofferson, appearing here on behalf of both himself and his wife, spoke of numerous intrusions onto their property and told you that they requested of me that I act on their behalf as their advocate to get the city to stop. He submitted a letter to you, written by his wife, detailing how she was a victim of a violent, armed home invasion. And I have read to you several emails that I sent to the city at the times of the events. Emails that not only expressed in unmistakable language that we were angry about the intrusions, we wanted them stopped, but that we also expected communication from the city as well. I told you that for Mrs. Christofferson, the intrusions triggered memories of the brutal attack that she had been subjected to. And I pointedly and repeatedly asked you relevant questions relating to these incidents at our July meeting, again in September, once again in October, and yet again last month at our November meeting. Each time you have ignored these concerns. Enough is enough. You proclaim that you try to make all citizens feel that they are treated equally by the city. These words are laughable. In previous appearances here in open forum, I have charged that responsibility is anathema to you. I have charged that you have conveniently created an atmosphere here among city officials whereby you do not hold either yourself or others accountable for your actions. And you have proved my points. So today, I ask you to step down from your position on council. On July the 2nd, 2012, at the courthouse of 1770 on Duke and Gloucester Street, you raised your right hand in front of Judge McGinney and you swore to faithfully discharge and perform all duties incumbent upon me as a city council member of the city of Williamsburg. Mayor, you have broken that promise. You have shattered the sacred bond of trust that should exist between citizens and their elected representatives. One needs only to review the past few council sessions to witness that you have willfully and deliberately, on multiple occasions, chosen not to respond to legitimate concerns from your constituents, that you have provided no oversight, and that you have held no one accountable for the city's actions. It should not be necessary for me to tell you that trespassing by city personnel onto private property is outrageous. This is self-evident. You have heard from constituents how upsetting these incidents were to them. This, of course, is understandable and is to be expected. Yet you have brushed aside their concerns as if the incidents never happened at all. The illegal intrusions on private property by city staff were obviously upsetting to your citizens, but your decision to disrespect them by ignoring their concerns, your refusal to perform your sworn duties, your choice not to uphold your oath of office are even more upsetting to them. Williamsburg deserves better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley. Anyone else wish to address the city on any issue? If not, I'll come back. Do we have closed session?
One.
We do.
We do, okay.
Mr. Mayor, I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please, Jerry.
Ms. Newsom.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
We'll take a 5-minute recess and come back into closed session.